All right, Shabbosai. A good night of Shabbos, a gezinten Zimmer. Hopefully everyone had a uplifting and meaningful fast. It is a zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to learn Torah together. Tell me, who didn't miss the daf today? It's amazing. Once you get into the daf, one of the most difficult parts of Tisha B'Av is not being able to go ahead and learn the daf. So Baruch Hashem, it is such a simcha and such a beautiful experience, Baruch Hashem, to be able to be here with all of you. Yeshkoach to Rabbi Silber and Simcha Eiken for dedicating the refreshments tonight. In the zechus that Hashem next year we should be in Yerushalayim. And to thank our sponsors for today's shir, to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors, Benjamin and Elys Wohl from the Tanya Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shir and Joshua this month in honor of Moishe, Abramson, and Jeremy Lasson for their selfless dedication in enabling Torah to be learned outside of the confines of our Bais Midrash. To thank Jack Bennett for dedicating all the Shir and Joshua this month in memory of Sergeant Nicholai Rappaport, who died al Kiddush Hashem in a Hezbullah ambush in 1998. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Michael and Leah Edidin, in memory of Leah's brother Yehonosan ben Yosef Zichron Lebracha. To thank Yanky Aliza Statman for dedicating the shir today. I think this is today's, right? It's for today, Yanky? This week. Oh, the week. Incredible. Okay, wonderful. It's sponsoring the week of learning in the zechus of refuah sheleimah for Chaya Rivka bas Nechama. She should have a refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. Baruch Hashem, 2 exciting blot ahead of. We should do this every week. You know what I'm saying? What a great Erev Shabbos, and what a great way to close out the week, begin Shabbos Kodesh. All right, so today's daf is Ayin Beis 72, and we are picking up in Yahrzeit Hashem on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis 71b. We left off at Abaye, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, we had a Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah spoke about the concept that a husband said to witnesses, to Eidim, he says, Nichtov get Amrulo, the witnesses say to the husband, Nichtov get le'ishtecha, should we write a get for your wife? And the husband says, yes, and so he says, yes, write it. They go out, hire the sofer, hire the Eidim, and then present him with a fully finished get. The Mishnah said the get is invalid. The get is invalid. Why is the get? So we're trying to figure out, why is the get invalid? So it says the Gemara, Abaye Amar, Kul Rabbi Meir. In fact, the entire Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. Remember again, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion, Mili Mimsiran L'Shliach, that at the end of the day, words, right, agency could be assigned. So the Gemara says, so Kul Rabbi Meir holds agency could be assigned. The Hacham asking on what's the case here? Delo Amar Tnu. So what's missing over here, so the failure over here is not the fact that the husband or that the Shaliach assigned the agency. The failure over here is that the husband only said kisvu, he didn't say tnu. This goes back to what we learned before, that Allah, in order to execute a full get process, husband has to say write and give. If that's the case, the Mishnah should have said that. The Mishnah should have said the get is possible up until the point that the husband says tnu. Al-Hacham asking on what's the case? But say here's the case. The case is where he made the mistake of not giving over the instructions to 3 people. Remember again, what's the chiluk between giving instructions over to 3 people versus 2 people? 3 people are a Bais Din. Once you constitute a Bais Din, then there's a svara to say that a Bais Din is empowered to then outsource the process to others. When you say to 2 are ultimately obligated to finish up the process themselves. If that's the case, that's the problem over here. The Mishnah should have said that the get is possible until you give it over to 3 people. Rather, again, Abaye kind of goes back, and Abaye says, you're right. The entire Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, again, remember, what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi holds, Mili lo mimsaran. You cannot assign agency. V'hacham asking on what's the case? Delo Amar Imru. Now, listen to this. Even if you hold that agency cannot be assigned, If Rabbi Yossi holds Mili lo mimsaran, you can't assign agency. Even if you hold that you can't assign agency, there is a case where you can assign agency. What's the case? Amar Imru, where the husband says to the agent, go and appoint someone else. We'll say, why is that mutter even if you hold you can't assign agency? Why? Because that's not called the assignment of agency. That's the initial agency. The initial agency itself demands to go ahead and find other people to perform the process. To which the Gemara says, Amar Imru. If that's the case, Achiyomar Imru mi baile. The Mishnah should have said that. The Mishnah should have said that the reason this get is invalid is because the husband did not say, go and tell someone else. But had he said that, it would have been kosher. Vod, mimod Rabbi Yossi Omer Imru. Does Rabbi Yossi agree in the case of Omer Imru that it's permitted to assign agency? V'hatanan we learned, ksav sofer ve'ed kosher. If you have the handwriting of a sofer and an aid that signed it to get his kosher, now we'll say that case doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? From Rabbi Yirmiyah, chasam sofer shaninu. We'll say, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says what that means is if you have a get, Rabbi say, and the get has the handwriting of the sofer, and the sofer also signed as one of the aidim together with another aid, such a get is kosher. Now, we'll say, now why does that work? Who's the pain? Does the Mishnah reflect? Top of Ayin Beis 72a, Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi. Da'amar mili lo mimsron l'shliach. Now, I will say that case only works if you hold like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that agency cannot be assigned, and therefore, again, these sakadait, and Rabbi Yossi, the reason why that case works is because, remember Rabbi Yossi, going back a little bit, what was the whole concern in the case where you have the sofer signing as a witness? Remember, what was the whole concern there? The whole embarrassment, kisufa the sofer. The whole concern over there was that maybe the husband really wanted other people to sign, but the agent who was overseeing the process was nervous about insulting the sofer, and therefore he asked the sofer to sign, even though the sofer was never actually part of the process. Now I will say, now again, if you hold like Rabbi Yossi, that mili lo mimser on agency is not assignable, then you don't really have that concern, because the shaliach is not going to assign his agency to someone else, for he doesn't have that right. Second line of from the top, Ayin Beis Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yossi Omer Imru. But if you hold that Rabbi Yossi indeed agrees with Omer Imru, the Rabbi Yossi says that halacha l'maisa, you could assign agency as long as the husband commanded that. Nafik mini churva. You could have a catastrophic situation over here. Sometimes the husband will say to two people, Imru l'sofer v'yichtov, u'leploni v'yichasmu. Right? You could have the husband saying to two people, listen, guys, I want you to go and hire a sofer, and then I want you to get two more people to sign as witnesses. And what's going to happen? Umishum kisufa the sofer, and because of the embarrassment of the sofer, umishum kisufa the sofer chayshi, umechas milei ubalo amar hachi. So we'll say again, that's the concern we were speaking about before. Ella mechavar Rachel Rabbi Meir b'sefer Rabbi Yossi. Sefer Rabbi Yossi Abaye, after this entire exhaustive approach, says, you know what? The only way for me to explain the Mishnah is that the first part of the Mishnah must reflect the view of Rabbi Meir, who holds agency is assignable, and the second part of the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi, who holds agency is not assignable. Okay, Ravashi comes along and offers a different interpretation. He says, Kula Rabbi Yossi, in fact, the entire Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Remembering what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi says, Mili lo mimseran l'shliach. You can't assign agency. V'lomi bai kamar. Lomi bai hecha de lo amar tnu. Ela filu amar tnu lo. So I will say, according to Ravashi, here's how you have to read the Mishnah. The Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Therefore, agency cannot be assigned. And therefore, I will say, when two guys go over to Reuben and say, Reuben, you want us to write a get for your wife? And Reuben says, Kisvu, go ahead and write it. And they go and hire the sofer, and they go and get the witnesses. That case, the get is puzzle. Why is the get puzzle? Because they're assigning an agency that was assigned to them, and they're assigning it to someone else. And we pass like Rabbi Yossi, that mili lo mimser, an agency is not assignable. So what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? The chiddush of the Mishnah is like this. Even if the husband would have said tenu, you thought the whole problem was that he just said kisvu. But even if he would have said tenu, still the get would be puzzle. And it goes without saying that if he issued this directive to two people, and not three people, the get certainly would be puzzle. I will say not only that, according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that agency is not assignable, even if you tell a group of three people to write a get for your wife, Lemaisa, again, they can't go out and hire a sofer and get Edidin, because Rabbi Yossi holds agency is not assignable even if it's a group of three. So the Gemara says, Ela afidu amar lebeit lasalo, v'lomi boy hecha delo amar imru. And what's like goes without saying that in a case where it's not amar imru, right? So in a case ultimately again where halacha lemaisa, the husband didn't say Omer Imru, of course it's not going to be good. Ela afilu amar imru nami lo. Rather, I will say the chiddush over here is even if the husband said, go and tell someone else to go ahead and write the get, the get itself would still be possible. Incredible. Tanya Kavasi de Ravashi. So we'll say, this is the position of Ravashi, right? So Ravashi explains ultimately again that really the entire Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Mili lo mimsaran, agency cannot be assigned, and therefore halacha l'maisa, when witnesses either approach the husband and offer their services, or are appointed by the husband, halacha l'maisa, they can't go out and hire a sofer, and they can't go out and get edim, because that's the assignment of the agency, and that does not work. Incredible. So Tanya Kavasi de Ravashi, Brais that supports Ravashi, Ksav sof, Kasav sofer l'shma, v'chasmu edim l'shma. If the sofer wrote to get l'shma, the edim signed l'shma, afa pishe kasu v'chasmu v'nasnu la, even though again they wrote the get was signed, and then they delivered back to the husband a full-fledged get, hare haget batal. The get is batal, ad sheyishmu'u kolo sheyomer l'sofer, ksov u'le'edim chasomu. So I will say, so this is pretty explicit. The get is going to be puzzle until when? The get is going to be puzzle until the sofer and the witnesses hear explicitly from the husband that they are obligated to go ahead and write the get. So Rabbi the Gemara says, Yishmu, what does it mean they have to hear? Lafuki man Amar mod Rabbi Yossi ba'omer imru. So Rabbi that comes to exclude the position of Omer imru. Kolo, they have to hear his voice. Lafuki mid Rav Kana Amarav. Rabbi so this comes to exclude the case of Rav Kana Amarav, who said that what? Who said that halacha l'maisa, a cheresh could issue a directive to go ahead and give a get, even mitoch aksav, even from writing. So Rabbi so this is the end of the sugya. First of all, Moshe David Artman, what's in that? What's in that cup? What's in that's Mamish. What do you have, like a mixologist at home? Incredible. All right. So I'll say, so Lamaisa, the Gemara says as follows. So I'll say, so bottom line, what comes out is as follows. The Gemara ends up holding halacha Lamaisa like Rabbi Yossi, mili lo mimsaran. So I will say, so listen to what the Rambam says. The Rambam says in Hilchos Gerishin, Perek Beis halacha hey, v'tzorech sheyomar habal atzmo l'sofer, ksov v'la edim chasomu. I will say, here's the takeaway from this sugya. Takeaway from the sugya is, a get only works if the sofer receives direct instructions from the husband, and the witnesses receive direct instructions from the husband. It could be, I will say, in other areas of shlichos, that agency is assignable. But by Gittin, we say mili lo mimsaran, and therefore again, sofer and witnesses have to hear directly from the husband. That's the psak of the Rambam. Incredible. We'll say Mishnah ayin beis amadav zegitech imasi zegitech mecholiza. So a man says to his wife, he gives her a get, and he says, "This is your get if I die." Right? This is your get if I die from this illness. Zegitech la'achar misa, or this is your get after I die. Lo amar klona. We'll say in all of these cases, the get is invalid. Now, why is the get invalid? We'll say because the mashmaos of the statement is that when does the husband want the get to be valid? After he dies, and you can't give a get posthumously. So therefore, these Gittin are invalid. Mehayom imasi. Watch this. Let's say he gives her a get, and he says to her, "This is your get from today, imasi, if I die." Right? Me'achshav imasi, or this is your get from now, if I die, hareze get. So I will say that is a good get. That is a good case. Why is that a good case? Because he's ultimately making it, in other words, he's putting in the retroactivity clause. What is the retroactivity clause? That when he dies, I will say what happens? The get is chal as of when? We'll actually talk about as of when, but sometime earlier than his death. Mehayom. Ula achra misa. Now listen to this. What happens if he says, he gives her a get, and he says, this is your get from today, ula and after death. And I will say, this is a confusing case. Why? Because here, he's using what appears to be two contradictory lashonos. He's saying, this is your get from today and after I die. So what do you do in this kind of case? The Gemara says, get ve'eno get. Safek migurashes. We're not sure, because since he's employing two contradictory lashonos, we're not sure what to do here. Ve'emes, now if the husband did die after giving her such a get, cholat says v'lo misyavemes. Ultimately, again, she does chalitza. In other words, if the husband were to die childless, she would do chalitza and not ibum. Zegitech mehayom imas micholi. That's an interesting case. He gives her a get. He says, this is your get from today, if I die of this illness. And I will say, now that case should work. What's the wrinkle over here? Va'amad v'halach b'shuk. He got better. He was out walking in the marketplace. V'chala umeis, and then he got sick again and he died. So we'll say, what's the shayla? Omdin also machmas chol yarisha meis hariz hagetim ma'aveno get. We'll say, what's the shayla? The shayla is the relapse considered to be an extension of the original illness, in which case, again, the get is chal. Or perhaps, no, the fact that he was healed, walked around, he got sick again, that second illness is unrelated to the first. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, the get is not valid. The get is not valid. So the Gemara says, omdin means we assess. We assess the situation and examine the illness. Good. Gemara. Alma imasi kila'achar misadami. Shabbos says, so what we see from the Mishnah is the lashon of imasi, if I die, sounds like a paschumas get. However, then it says, hadar tani, mehayom imasi, me'achshav imasi. Shabbos says, but then it said, from today if I die, or from now if I die, it is a good get. Alma imasi, lav kila'achar misadami. Shabbos says, imasi sounds like not as paschumas. Which one is it? Amrabaye. No. Imasi, or imasi, shtei lashonos mashma. Shabbos say that phrase, if I die, could really be interpreted as either before death or after death. So what does it matter? Like most things in life, it matters what the modifier is. So the Gemara says, so it sounds like present, and it sounds like la'achar misa. So the Gemara is like this: Amar la mehayom kiman da amar la me'achshav dami lo amar la mehayom kiman da amar la la'achar misa dami. So Rabbi say the lashon of imasi by itself is an ambiguous lashon. So therefore, everything depends on what you put before it. If you put mehayom or me'achshav, then that ultimately tells me that the way he is using imasi means what? From before death. He's putting in the retroactivity clause, and ultimately, again, it will be chal sometime before their death. Good. Zegitech imasi lo amar klum. He gives you, this is your get if I die. He has not said anything. Such a statement is irrelevant. Rav Huna said the choletzas. And if he dies without children, she does chalitza. But that doesn't make sense. V'hal lo amar klum katani. But we just said that if he says to her, this is your get if I die, it's a meaningless statement. And we'll say, what does it mean if it's a meaningless statement? What's the status of the get? The status of the get? There's no get. There's no get. If there's no get, then what? Then l'maisa again, she's a widow. She's a widow. If she's a widow, ultimately, again, she should be able to do yibum, right? So Gemara says, lo amar klum, he didn't say anything in that, da asira la'alma, she remains asura to the world, ula yavam nami asira. But she's also asura to the yavam, again, seemingly because of the ambiguity in the lashon. V'hami the sefer choletzes, but the fact that the end of the Mishnah said choletzes, mechlal the reishi yavu minami yatma, sounds like the reishi case she could even do yibum. Masnisin kerabanon v'Rav Huna. Our Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbana and Rav Huna. What does this mean? The Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi said this is fascinating. The Rabbana and the Rav Huna hold like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi said, what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi holds zmano shel shtar mochiach alav. Rabbi said it happens in the statement of Rabbi Yossi. Rashi brings this down that ultimately, again, Rabbi Yossi says it's really by a shtar matana, by a document of a gift. Rabbi Yossi's opinion is as follows. Rabbi Yossi says the power of a date in a document is that the date tells you when the document is to take effect. That's the role of a date. Zmano shel shtar mochiach. So whatever we want to look at, when is this shtar chal? Ultimately, Rabbi Yossi says, look at the date. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi chalitza nami lo tibai. But if that's the case, according to Rabbi Yossi, then ultimately, again, there should be no chalitza either, because there should be a valid divorce. Maybe I'll say Rav Huna was Mesupak. He wasn't sure, does the halacha follow Rabbi Yossi, not follow Rabbi Yossi. Is he Mesupak? Rabba bar Avua, this is in this case, we'll say, or this is the story, Rabba bar Avua, Chalash, became ill. So Rabba Avua became ill. All the Gabei Rav Huna Rav Nachman. Rav Huna Rav Nachman came to visit Rabba bar Avua. Amrli Rav Huna Rav Nachman. So Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, Boi minei me Rabba bar Avua, halacha Rabbi Yossi or ein halacha Rabbi Yossi. Listen. We're doing Bikur Cholim. But you have to understand, in times of the Gemara, part of Bikur Cholim was to extract whatever remaining Torah knowledge that had not yet been shared. Right? Because remember, I will say, once upon a time, Torah Shel Baal Peh was really Baal Peh. So that means when the Rebbe died, whatever knowledge he did not share ultimately went with him. So here you have these two Rabbanim. So Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, ask Rabbi Bar Avua, does the halacha follow Rabbi Yossi or not? So listen to this. Amrlei. So Rav Nachman said. Talmud Rabbi Yossi lo yedana halachi ba'imine. I don't even know Rabbi Yossi's svara, and you want me to ask Rabbi Bar Avua if the halacha follows him? Amrlei at ba'imine halacha v'tamid Rabbi Yossi ana amin halacha. Do me a favor. So Rav Huna says back to Rav Nachman, just ask him. Just ask him if the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi or not. Just, it's yes or no. I'll explain everything else to you afterwards. So ultimately, fine, Rav Nachman asked Rabbi Ravua, does the halacha follow Rabbi Yossi or not? Amar li hachi amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Yossi. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Nachman did his part. Afterwards, he comes to Rav Huna and he says, Labasra denafik, Amar le hainu tamid Rabbi Yossi dekasavar zmano shel shtar mochiach halav. And afterwards, Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, by the way, now that we know that halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, the svara, the logic is that the date ultimately again shows us when the shtar is going to be effective. Ella misapkale. So we'll say, what's the suffix? We'll say ayin base amud base 72b. Ella misapkale I Rabbi Yossi balpeh. I Rabbi Yossi balpeh. I lo amar. So we'll say, here's the shaila. The shaila is, do we say zmana shel shtar mochiach when there's a component of balpeh? What does this mean? Take a look at the top Rashi on ayin base amud base 72b. Rashi says kigon. God beget shekasa kilchaso. Could imagine we'll say the following case. You have a get, a regular get, that was written in accordance with the regular halacha. Ukishemosra la omer zegitech imasi. Now listen, now watch this. Then what happens? As he's giving her the get, he says, so Reuben says to Rachel, it's a regular get, right? Get is just regular date, everything, right? The get is dated. The get is dated the 10th of Av. He gives her the get, and as he's giving her the get, he says, this is your get if I die. Okay, so we'll say, so now what's the shaila? Hilchach. So we'll say, so now the shaila is, so what do we follow? Like in other words, do we still say that Rabbi Yossi holds zmano shel shtar mochiach? Or is that what he always holds, and therefore the get is effective as of the date recorded? Or maybe, since there was a follow-up, almost qualification of the get, maybe we don't just simply rely on the date. It's really a suffix. We learned, if a man says, Reuben says to Rachel, this is your get if I don't come back within 12 months, and he dies within the 12 months, ain't no get. It's not a get. It's not a get, because I was saying in this case over here, the get really only becomes valid when? At the end of 12 months. With Tani Allah, we learned about this. The rabbis ultimately again allowed her to get remarried. Who are the Rabbanon? Shmuel, Beidina Desharu Mishka. It'll say it's the same base in Rashi says Rabbi Huda Nisia, ultimately again who permitted the oil of idolaters. So remember again, remember Salazar speaks of all of these different gezeros we have. You can't eat the cheese of non-Jews, you can't drink the wine of non-Jews. Originally they said you can't use the oil of non-Jews as well. That halacha was later on repealed. The Rabbi Yossi, the Amar, Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach, Allah. And they hold the Rabbi Yossi who says that when it comes to both sides to determining when the get is chal, it's one simple thing we look at, which is the date. We look at the date. So the Gemara says, Ella, Misapka le'i halacha Rabbi Yossi balpeh, o ein halacha. So Rabbi say, so here's what's interesting. It appears that everyone is going to agree that the halacha, in fact, follows Rabbi Yossi. That we say, Zmano shel shtar mochiach. Ultimately, we look at the date, and the date in the get is what determines for us the effective date of the get, when the get is chal. The shaila is, Rabbi says, when you give a get with a date, and then when you're giving it, you add in some type of condition. So now, do we go after the date, or do we go after the condition? Mimasakle is really a suffix. Rava said, imasi, this is your get if I die. V'sha'ani meis, or if I die, harei a get. Ultimately, again, the get is good. Kisha amos, if he gives, this is your get when I die. Ula'achar misa, and after I die, ein ze get. It's not a get. To which the Gemara says, hey chidami, what's the case? Ilema da amar la mehayom. If he added in mehayom imasi, right? Then v'rabanan, and it reflects the view of the rabbanan. Tzricha l'meimer doesn't need to be said. V'atanan, we learned mehayom imasi hare ze get. Also, we saw this in the Mishnah that whenever you add in mehayom, right? Mehayom imasi, from today if I die, that is a valid get. Because the way we understand that statement is it's a retroactivity clause. V'ela lav delo amar le mehayom. Rather, it must be that he did not say mehayom. V'rabanan, and reflects the view of the v'rabanan tzricha l'meimar. So v'rabanan, do you have to say it? V'hatan we learned mehayom imasi harei ze get. V'ela lav delo amar le mehayom v'Rabbi Yossi. Rather, it must be we're talking about a case where he didn't say mehayom, and it reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi, and shma mina halacha Rabbi Yossi. And once again, this affirms the fact that the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. I will say even when followed up with a verbal statement. The Rava pshitale, according to Rava, this was pashit. Rav Huna wasn't sure. The other possibility is the Olam de Amar le Mehayom. In fact, he said to her from Mehayom, V'Rabbanon, let's see the of the Rabbanon. V'hani lishni itzrichale. And ultimately, again, this had to be start for the following reason. Shani meis ki'im masidami. To teach us the following idea, that when he says shani meis is the equivalent of im masi, if I die. Ukisha amos, when I die, kila achar misadami, is a lashon of equivalent of after my death, in which case the get will not be valid. The igid masni la seifa. I will say other have the statement of Rav Huna going on the seifa. How does it work? If the man says to his wife, "This is your get after I die," the statement is meaningless. Amar Rav Huna or the divrei Rabbi Yossi choletzes. But according to Rabbi Yossi, she has to do chalitza. And I will say, now what's the logic in that? Right? Remember again, he's giving her a get. He says, "This is your get. After I die. After I die." So the Gemara is going to say it's not a get, but according to Rabbi Yossi, she needs chalitza. Why she needs chalitza according to Rabbi Yossi? Because zmano shel shtar mochiach. Remember again, Rabbi Yossi's opinion is the date in the get is what determines the effectiveness of the get. And it appears that we even disregard any subsequent statements. We just look at the date. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi choletzes pshita. Mid the sefer the Rabbanon choletzes, Rachel Nami Rabbi Yossi choletzes. If in the sefer the Rabbanon going to say chalitza, the Rachel Rabbi Yossi will say chalitza. Malate Mo'odra thought Rabbi Yossi b'hak Rabbi Svirle. Perhaps Rabbi Yossi was like Rabbi. Do Amar Gita Ma'al Yohavi. Maybe it's a good get. The chalitza nami lo tiboy, and she shouldn't even require chalitza. Kamash malon de lo Rabbi Sarvala Rabbi Yossi, velo Rabbi Yossi Sarvala Rabbi. Ultimately, we'll say, what do we learn? Halacha l'maisa. Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi. Rabbi lo Sarvala like Rabbi Yossi, so Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Diktani kazeh get lemeute de Rabbi Yossi. So ultimately, again, so Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, because he holds in this case kazeh get. It's a proper get to exclude the position of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi lo sarvala Rabbi. Rabbi Yossi won't hold like Rabbi. Diktani kazeh get lemeute de Rabbi. Rabbi mai. By the way, the Gemara is talking about Rabbi doesn't hold the Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi doesn't hold the Rabbi. What's the case of Rabbi? Here we go. The Sanya mehayom ula achar misa. We'll say Bryce says Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says this is your get mehayom from today and after I die. So get ve'eno get. So we'll say what's the lashon of get ve'eno get? Safek migureshes. Divrei chachamim. Rabbi Omer. Rabbi says kazeh get. No, this is a valid get. This is a valid get. And we'll say Rabbi's logic seems to be mehayom. The fact that you have mehayom from today, that ultimately again creates a retroactivity clause. Rabbi Yossi Mahi, what's the case of Rabbi Yossi? Disnan, kisvu utinu get leishti, im lobasi mikan va'ad yud beis chodesh. Right, go ahead and write and give a get to my wife if I do not come back within 12 months. From now until 12 months. Kasvu b'sof yud beis chodesh, if they wrote the get within 12 months, v'nasnu la achar yud beis chodesh, but went ahead and gave it to her after yud beis chodesh, eino get. It's not a get. Rabbi Yossi Omer kazeh get. So fine. So that marks the end of that sugya. What exactly do we go ahead and take from this? So I will say, what gets confusing about this case is as follows. Well, I guess the speed of that we did it probably is probably confusing. Sorry. Right? So again, just to understand what's happening over here, right? So husband is let's go with what we know, right? A husband says, "This is your get when I die," right? So obviously not good, posthumous get, right? This is your get from today. If I die, everyone's going to agree. Good get. The mehayom ultimately creates a retroactivity clause. Now, we'll say, when the retroactivity clause is triggered, we still have to see. So let me just quote you from the Rambam. So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Gerushin, Perek Tes, and I will say there's a couple of halachos, so let's just take a quick look. Here we go. Bari shesna shia get ze imasi. Al cholish shesna shia ze get ze imasi v'choli ze lo merklum. Start with the easy case, like we said before. The Rambam says, Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says, this is your get if I die. Or this is your get if I die of this illness. Ultimately, again, not a good get, because the mashmos, the inference of the statement, ultimately is that the get will only be chal after death, and Reuven can't give Rachel a get to be chal after the death. That's case one, simple. Case two, which is halacha yud gimel. Amrla, harei gitech me'achshav imasi. O mehayom imasi. So if he says to her, this is your get from now, me'achshav from now, or from today, im masi, if I die, harei ze get. The get is good. Ukishiyamus timi gereshes. So I will say, but when is the divorce triggered? When is the divorce triggered? When is it triggered? With his death. Right? So death triggers the divorce, but once the death is triggered by divorce, it's retroactively chal. Okay? I would say, where does that become complicated? The next halach. Halach yedal. Amar la. Hare zegi techmi achshav o mehayom. So far so good. This is your get from now or from today. La'achar misasi. After my death. So we'll say, you hear what's happening over here? Case number one is he said, this is your get after my death. We'll say, what's the halacha in that case? What's the halacha? No good. Right? That's case one. Case two. This is your get from now, me'achshav or mehayom, from today, if I die, or when I die. Or let's go with if I die. If I die. What's the halacha we'll say? What's the halacha? Totally good. Right? Why? Because ultimately, again, death will trigger the get, and let's assume right now it'll be retroactively chal to when he gave it to her. The complicated case, which is what this is the entire Amud Beis, the complicated case, Rabbi says, when he says like this, this is your get from now, right? La'achar misasi, after I die. I will say, what's the problem? What's the inherent problem with this formulation? Right? He's saying mehayom, which sounds like he wants it to be chal now, but then he's saying la'achar misasi, after my death. The problem will say is there is no concept, there is no process of get after the death of the husband. So this lashon very much derails, and therefore the Rambam says, Hare zu safek migureshes. Shema achar she'amar me'achshav chazer ba milashon me'achshav some that alachar misa. Rabbi said, this is incredible. The Rambam says it's safek migureshes. Rabbi said, now why is it safek migureshes? Listen to this. What are we not sure about? See, Rabbi said, to a certain degree, he made two contradictory statements. What are his contradictory statements? He gives her the get. First thing he says is, this is your get when? When? From now. And then he says, after I die. So what are we concerned about? Does he want to get to the chal now? Or does he want to get to the chal after I die? So I will say, because we're not sure what his intention are, and because if he means that second thing, it's a fundamentally flawed get, the Rambam says, safek migureshes. Ultimately, it's safek. So I will say, safek migureshes would mean, normally we would require the husband to give another get, right? Or in the event that he died, and let's say he died without children, we would make her do chalitza, and she would not be able to do yibum. Okay, good. I will say that closes out that sugya. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara as follows. We'll say 2 dots, bottom of Ayin Beis, Amud Beis, 72b, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines are from the bottom. Amrav Huna, Gito Kimatanasa. Once we actually had this sugya before, it's actually quite interesting. His get is like his matana. What does this mean that get is like the matana? Ma matana so amad choser. We'll say, watch this. If a person gives a matna shchidnila, right? They go ahead and they give a gift. The person's chas, Reuven's on his deathbed, and he goes ahead and he gives a gift. We'll say, what happens if Baruch Hashem he recovers? The gift is voided. The gift returns. Af gitam amad choser. So we'll say, same idea. If a husband gave a get to his wife, and it was clearly predicated on the thought that he had an illness from which he was going to die, and then Baruch Hashem he recovers, ultimately again the get is void. Umagito afagav delo parish kevan damar ksolvu. So we'll say, so too by a get. Even though, again, husband wasn't totally explicit, rather, kevan damar ksolvu, once he tells them to write the get, they are empowered to do so. Afagav delo amar tnu. Even though he did not tell them to give it. In other words, right? Ideally, he should write kisvu tenu. If he just said kisvu, that's enough to get the process going. Why? Because we understand what he means. Af matanaso, so too with a gift, kevan da amar tenu. Once you say tenu, af agav delo kanu mine. Ultimately, even though a kinyan was not done for this gift, ultimately again the gift is acquired. Fine. So tonight we learn zegi techmeyam masmi choliza. Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says, "This is your get from today. If I die from this illness." Va'amad v'halach b'shuk. And then I will say, Baruch Hashem, he has a refuah sheleimah, or he has a refuah enough to get up and walk around the marketplace. V'chalo meis, and then he gets sick again, and he dies. Omdim also in machmas chol yarisha meis harei get. Im lav eno get. We'll say this is Mishnah. The Mishnah, right? So he says, "This is your get if I die from this illness." Baruch Hashem, he recovers enough to go out into the marketplace. Then he gets sick again, and then he dies. So I will say, so what's the halacha? We assess him, and umdina, did he die of the first illness? Not die of the first illness. So the Gemara says, "Ve'ein omrim im amad chazar." Now I will say, now listen to this, and we don't say that halacha l'maisa. We don't say once he gets up and walks around in the shuk, by definition, the get is void. Right? In other words, the fact that he just got up, right? That should be enough to void. We don't say that. So the Gemara says, Lama li umdina hari amar. I don't understand. Why do you need an umdina? We'll say, if Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says, if I die from this illness, this should be your get. Right? Mihayom, me'achshav, right? And then he gets up. So we'll say, so that's it. He got up. Baruch Hashem. He got up. That should void the process. Why do you need an umdina? Why do you need an assessment? He gets sick later on. We have to see, did he get sick from the first thing? Understand, once he gets up, that should shut down the process. That's it. No. We'll say, what's the case? The case is where he didn't have a period of recovery. Instead, what ended up happening was what? He went from illness to illness. From illness to illness. But the Mishnah says he got up, which of us sounds like at some point in time he had some level of recovery. So which the Gemara says, what it means is he recovered from one illness, but very quickly fell into the clutches of a second illness. But the Mishnah said he walked around in the marketplace, to which the Gemara says, Al Mishanto. He walked. Let's say, how did he walk? With a cane, with crutches. In other words, he wasn't walking unaided. So I will say, it's very interesting. You see from the Mishnah, the way you read the Mishnah is, you assume the Mishnah means, he gave her the get, so this is your get if I die from this illness, then what? Baruch Rofei Cholim, he's fine, and then he gets sick again. Tushimara says, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. What happened is, he was perpetually sick. But ultimately, again, he went from one illness to another illness. He was able to walk around, but with aided. Top of Ayin Gimel, 73. And I will say again, what's the Chiddush? The Chiddush ultimately is that once he is ambulatory, right? Once he's mobile, then you have to kind of assess what's happening over here. Was there a recovery? Or was there not a recovery? So I will say what's interesting is, it sounds like over here from the Gemara, that if Reuben were to go ahead and give Rachel a get, and he were to say to her, this is your get from today if I die from this illness. So I will say, so let's say now what happened? He's sick. And I will say, let's say it happens to be that first illness goes away. But as a result of maybe a second illness sets in, and he dies from the second illness, sounds like from the Gemara that the get would still be a valid get. Right? Why? Because Lamai says, as long as there was no period of recovery from the first illness, the condition has been satisfied. The case that becomes a little bit tricky is where he's sick, right? He's well enough to get out of bed, and then ultimately again becomes sick again and then dies. That's the case that needs the umdina. What happened over here? Was there recovery? Was there not a recovery? Good. Idach. So I will say, so listen to this. On the other hand, I just mentioned this. If he stayed in bed the entire time, in other words, he never got out of bed, umdina nami lo ba'inan. So I will say, this is actually really interesting. So what ends up happening is, I would have thought maybe, right? Reuven is sick. He has sickness A. He says, if I die of this sickness, right, this is your get from today if I die of this sickness. It turns out that what? Turns out that sickness A went away, but he got sickness B. And that's what he died of. So the Gemara says, you see from here that halacha l'maisa, the get is a valid get. But he didn't die from sickness A. Essentially, I will say the way we look at the Tanai is, if I don't recover from this current situation, I die from this prolonged state of sickness, the get is a get. Even if it turns out that it's a different disease that killed him, at the end of the day, the get is still a get. Shamas Mina, what do you learn from here? Now, both say, listen to this. This has a profound ramification for Shchiv Meira as well. I will say, remember again, a guy is on his deathbed. What does he do? He gives away his property. I will say, let's say he's on his deathbed because he's suffering from disease A. It turns out that he's healed from disease A, but he contracts disease B. And that's what he dies from. But there was never a period of recovery in between those two illnesses. The matana stays. Right? The matana is still valid. Incredible. Dam Rabbi Lazar, Mishmei Derav, Shchimera shenitak mecholi lecholi, matana so matana. A shchimera who goes from one illness to another illness, I will say, and ultimately dies, but never recovers. Right? There's never a period of interim recovery. Ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, his matana remains a matana. I will say, I'm just going to pause here for just a second. I'm just going to have to reset the YouTube thing. Take some refreshments or something.
You have to wait like 20 seconds.
Wait, but don't leave. Don't leave. Just like shit's still going on. Right? Second daf is even better than the first. Just wait a second.